Bob Cain, you've been involved in the media for a long time, covering the sport that you love, harness racing, but um, Bob was a legend in the journalistic game.
Oh, there was no one better, probably.
Yeah. First of all, how did you come across Bob Cain?
I think through the early days when I used to go to the showgrounds trots and that sort of thing, I'd see him because he worked originally for the Trotting Control Board, and he started there when he was about 16. I think he got a job there as an office boy virtually. And we used to always go on a Saturday night and go into the Trotting Control Board offices to pick up the trial sheets and the race sheets for the coming few days and that sort of thing. And he used to be in the office and you'd say, "G'day, Bob. G'day,
Yeah.
Alan. G'day, Fred." Those people. And that's probably where it all started.
So the Trotting Control Board, just explain that in today's terms. Is that like HRV?
Well, the Trotting Control Board was the predecessor of what is Harness Racing Victoria now.
Yeah.
They were based at the showgrounds on the tiny track there at the showgrounds, and that's where their offices were for years.
Was it always Bob's dream to be a journalist? Is that what he wanted to be?
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Look, he came from a racing family. His father, Tommy, was a jockey. He was a very successful jockey in Mauritius.
Yeah.
And I guess when somebody in the family's involved in the racing game, that it carries on through the family.
What makes a great journalist, Len, and why was Bob such a great journalist?
Well, he just had everything at his fingertips. There was nothing he didn't know about anything. You would ask him a question, he would always be able to answer it.
Is that a skill, or is that he could absorb all that information, or was he a man that dedicated his life to journalism regarding the research and making sure that...
Well, I think he was probably, you would talk of him like that. But it's something that comes to you or it doesn't come to you, and it came to him, Gareth.
Where did he get his big break from?
I suppose he got his big break after leaving the Trotting Control Board. He was approached by Sid Brennan, who they were bringing out a publication called Best Bets.
Yeah.
And he was requested by Sid to go and join him and become assistant editor of Best Bets. Now, Best Bets, as you know, it's nothing like it was today in those days, but it was just a little publication, and it had a section on the gallops, a section on the trots, a section on the dogs. And Bob became trotting rider for Best Bets as well. And that led to him going to their sister publication, Truth Newspaper, which ran the biggest form guide in Australia as far as the gallops were concerned. And he became chief trotting rider for the Truth.
And back in those days, it was such a competitive business, and there were a lot of journalists that would have loved Bob's job.
Absolutely.
Especially at the Truth.
Absolutely.
What separated him from the others to get a job like that? And I guess it was pretty early on in his career as well.
It probably was.
Yeah. So the responsibility of being the chief harness racing rider for the Truth, just explain.
Well, it just came to him naturally, I would think. I mean, he knew everybody, which was a big advantage, Gareth. If you're working in the media and you know the people, it's a big advantage. You well know that yourself.
Yeah. Bob and his association here with the Kilmore Harness Racing Club, he lived in this country town just outside of Melbourne, Len?
Yes, they moved here in 1986, Gareth.
Yeah.
And Kilmore became his home. I guess everybody in Kilmore knew him, and he knew everybody in Kilmore, I would imagine. What
part of the style of the journalism that you enjoyed most about?
Just the way he used to put words together, Gareth, I would say.
And his research and...
obviously he did a lot of research.
He must have loved to do that with the research you would have done for the Kilmore Cup and the Miracle Mile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would just say that because of his involvement in the sport and in harness racing, his name will live on forever through the Hall of Fame, the Victorian Harness Racing Hall of Fame, and through the Bob Cain Memorial Award as well. Yeah, I think it's great that Kilmore each year honour him as they do with others on their memorial night, but he would never ever be forgotten by the Kilmore people here, and it's just something that'll go on for years and years and years.
Bob Cain's greatest legacy would be the books that he wrote about this sport.
I would think you would say that the books that he wrote, because as you know, if an author writes a book that becomes a bestseller,
Yeah.
or one that everybody wants a copy of, their name is etched there forever and a day. So because of those 3 books, the Kilmore, The Cup That Grew, Harnessing a Miracle, and another 12 miracles, that certainly would play a big deal in it.
My name's Chris Cain. I'm the son of Bob Cain.
Yep. The legendary harness racing rider, Bob Cain. Can you remember, how would you describe your dad?
Unique.
Yeah.
Unique. He was a character, but to a lot of people, he was more than that. And it sounds a bit strange to think that someone who was a journalist could be any different, but he had a way of dealing with people and touching people, and it was strange. He was a special individual who loved his sport and loved his friends and those around him. He was a hard worker, but he was fair and honest. So he was I guess you'd call him a good bloke.
Yeah. And do you think that was his greatest advantage of being a really good journalist, because he had that ability to get people to trust him and opened up and
he liked to call it as he saw it. He did his work, his research. He was very meticulous. He knew his stuff, whether it was racing or sports, Olympics, everything. He just had a head full of information. People often say that Bruce McAvaney's an encyclopedia. Well, I reckon to a degree Bobby could have had him covered.
Yeah.
His knowledge was just exceptional and across many different topics. But he was just a unique person, was the same no matter who it was. It could have been a member of parliament or just some bloke off the street. Bobby would always treat them the same, and he held no one in any different regard. But he was a bit of fun. He was a character for sure. So,
what was his great passion? You mentioned that he used to cover a lot of sports. He was the cricket writer for The Truth. He covered the VFL. He did cycling. He covered Melbourne Cups, and he covered all the big harness racing events. But what was Bob's passion?
I think if you look at it, it's probably the horse.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the code was, he liked racing. Like he come from a racing family. His father was a jockey, rode overseas, was a couple of premierships in Mauritius, won the equivalent of, I guess, our Melbourne Cup on probably what would have been their Far Lap at the time, rode that a couple of times, I think. It was the Duke York Cup or something, but he won that a couple of times. And so he's come from a racing family and probably from a young age would have developed that passion for racing from being in that environment. But he liked all sport and competition. But probably his passion would have been, I guess, racing and the people in racing.
Yeah.
And he developed some really strong friendships through racing. And it was probably the horse and then the horse people that was his passion in life.
Do you have a favourite horse?
Yes, he did. Without a doubt, he would say Cardigan Bay was his favourite, the best horse he'd ever seen. I remember at the time, it probably would have been after Nordley's second Cox Plate, and I asked him, I said, is Nordley the best horse you've seen or your favourite horse? And he just looked at me and he sort of said Cardigan Bay. Yeah. And that was obviously it would have been his childhood favourite. Everyone has their favourite horse from when they were young, although Cardigan Bay, I think, was in the early 60s. He was probably growing up then. Like myself, my favourite horse was Kingston Hound from when I was a kid.
Yeah.
But his, from those early days, was always Cardigan Bay. And any time you would ask him the best horse he'd seen or his favourite horse, it was always Cardigan Bay.
Yeah.
In his office at home, he only had pictures of a couple of horses, and one of those was Cardigan Bay, the other Mary's Idol and Dan Patch, the American horse. But Cardigan Bay was always his favourite horse.
Do you have favourite participants in racing or in sport that he liked to interview or deal with?
He had his favourites. He had he enjoyed when certain people had success. He enjoyed when Fred Kersley brought Norley over because they were friends for 30 odd years or so. But I think if you think about it, the most part he enjoyed about that was the fact that there was a trotting person who brought a horse over and took on the galloping establishment and beat them. And I think apart from the fact that the horse was trained by his mate, that it was a trotting bloke doing all that, and that would have gave him a lot of satisfaction because deep down he always liked to see the underdog get up. And I'm sure a lot of racing people were a little bit offside when they had a trotting bloke come over and produce a horse that could win Cox Plates and Caulfield Cups.
I think the harness racing journalists, and Adam Hamilton did, and your father Bobby, they had a big advantage over the gallops trainers because Fred was the man with Northerly during his dominance when he won 2 Cox Plates and a Caulfield Cup. But they had that relationship with Fred, and they would have been getting all the scoops basically regarding Northerly.
I know that Dad was able to get on early the second year when word got out that he was going to go to the Caulfield Cup.
Yes.
So they sort of got inside information there, which I think they might have banked a little bit on. But
it was payday, I think, for a few of them.
Yeah, no, that was good. But he always, you'd ask him about that, but he'd go back that Cardigan Bay was his favourite. But whenever it was someone that he developed a friendship with, he took a lot of pleasure from that as well. So.
What about growing up here in Kilmore, and what did this race club mean to him?
We always used to come up. I remember before we moved to Kilmore, we were living in Tullamarine, and every year we'd get a day off school and we'd come up to the races. And I just thought, how good is this? We get to go to the races, being a racing mad kid. And it wasn't until he'd done his work on his book that you realised that he was coming up here. And I think there's a passage in the book he wrote that it implied, I think it was Jack Elliott might have had a go at the Inter-Dominion, saying that he wouldn't watch it if it was in his backyard. Well, Bobby put it in his book that, he'd worked at 17 Melbourne Cups, and if you ran it in his backyard, he wouldn't draw the curtains, but he'd walk over broken glass to come and watch a Kilmore Cup. So it was always his big thing, like the day that he liked. He liked the Kilmore Cup and he liked the Hunter Cup. They were the 2 traditional trotting races that he was always big on.
Why the Kilmore Cup?
I guess being a traditionalist that he was, the fact that it was a standing start and it was a testing distance, he always thought that would bring the best out. You don't get any weak horses that would have won a Hunter Cup or a Kilmore Cup. You look at the honour roll, you had Pure Steel and Popular Arm and all those. So they were always the good horses that would come here. And that's what you want to see in any field of sport, is the best compete. And at the time when it was coming up, that all the good horses used to come to Kilmore, and I guess that's what just caught Bobby's imagination, that it was always the best. And a small club like this was able to put on such a big day, and from memory it was just massive. Like the crowds were massive, there were people everywhere, and it would be like trying to get a Cox Plate Day crowd in here. It was just packed. There was no room to move anywhere.
When you think about Kilmore, you think of the Knights. His relationship, do you remember, did he ever talk about, especially Vinnie Knight and Popular Arm, the day that he won his Kilmore Cup?
Oh, the 2 Kilmore Cups, yeah. I remember being here for the second one, although I would have only been about 6, I think, or 5. But it was just, the town sort of, it was probably known for 2 things, Assumption College and the Knights at the time.
Yeah.
Obviously Assumption College because of the footballers that it produced, and the Knights put Kilmore on the map through their success and all that. Whenever there was a trot meeting here on a Monday, it'd be down pub for tea, and you'd see the faces, obviously. So you're aware of what was around in town for sure.
Peter V'landys, he's, of course, the CEO of Racing New South Wales. He's the chair of rugby league at the moment in the NRL. He's quoted in saying that Bob was a brilliant journalist, legendary author, but most importantly, he was a champion bloke. How do you feel when you hear that, especially from a man like Peter V'landys?
It makes you feel proud. And you go through life that if you can have someone say that you're a good bloke, that's pretty, that's tip top. and he had a good relationship with Peter. They were really relaxed around each other. Bobby was probably one of the few people that could deal with Peter the way he did and get away with it. Like, 'cause Peter's a pretty powerful person, but Bobby just treated him like he was just another person, not someone who's high above. And I guess that's why Peter respected him so much, because he was a straight shooter. And Peter V'land's he's gun barrel straight with everything when you see him. So
What inspired Bobby to write books on the Kilmore Cup and write books on the Miracle Mile? To go above and beyond just being a journalist writing the news, the story of the day, but what inspired him to go and say, oh, well, I want to write a book on the Miracle Mile and the Kilmore Cup?
He liked history, and I guess he wanted to capture history, to get it written down and what he'd known, because one of the big things was that he could recall pretty much, if you said a year or something, he could give you winners or whatever. So he just liked that aspect of things. And I think the Kilmore Cup book, which was the first one he came, that just come from him writing down recollections or whatever, and then it developed from there and developed into the book that he did, and then he won for the Miracle Mile, and then another one for the Miracle Mile, and went from there.
Did he ever say to you that he had a famous or a favourite Kilmore Cup moment?
I don't think he had a favourite Kilmore Cup moment. He just liked them all. And when we moved to Kilmore, they were big weekends. You'd have people coming from everywhere, and he just liked that.
What would he think now that he's got the Bob Cain award for leading harness racing journalist now in his state? He's got the Bob Cain Memorial here at Kilmore. What would he say about that?
Knowing Dad, he'd probably be upset it's not a Group 1. He always used to, one of his things was that when they'd hand out the Australian, the OAMs or the awards, that his name was never there. He'd go, oh, they've missed out on me again and whatnot. So he always used to joke about that, but it was purely joking.
Yeah. What was the best advice he gave you?
He used to have quite a few, actually. One was never trust anyone who wears brown shoes.
Yeah.
Forthcoming with the advice, but he'd let you know if you were sort of going the wrong way, which was good. Like, he wasn't a pushy parent with anything like that. I was thinking about earlier, like when you were playing sport and all that, he'd let you know where you might have been going wrong, but if you were doing good, you didn't hear from him. So he wasn't like that. And in life, it was just sort of, I'll just steer you in the right direction.
And I don't think many people get to do this, but he got to live his passion through his work.
Oh yeah. He loved the horse. So, and going to race meetings, that was it. And back in the I guess the days of the 80s and 90s at Moonee Valley, the press room would be crowded because there'd be so many journalists there, and he'd be holding court, and that was him in his element. Yeah, that's what he loved doing, and to think, you know, he covered so many wonderful things, and the people that he worked for. He was the ghostwriter for Jack Dyer and Jeff Thompson and all that, and all this, but really at the end of the day, he just loved horses. Yeah. And I guess his one thing I remember him saying was when he retired, he just wanted to get a little bit of land and just have horses and a seat on a veranda just watching horses in paddock. That's all he wanted to do.
Yeah. And what does it mean for the family to have the Bob Cain Memorial here at Kilmore?
Well, I think it's great.
Yeah.
I reckon it's great that he can be remembered. It gives something for the kids to come along and see. Look, they're making a bit of a fuss about their grandfather. I like it that hopefully one day that we might be able to get a horse to run in the race and lo and behold win it. But that's a dream. But I just think it's great that after all his work, that you know, the club that he loved and the town that we lived in so much, you know, run a race in his name. I think he'd be over the moon with that. Although he'd probably be happiest if it was run at the showgrounds because he loved the showgrounds. But Kilmore's pretty good, I think.
Yeah. Well, that's your Melbourne Cup into the Dominion Kilmore Cup, the Bob Cain Memorial for you, Chris. That'd be the pinnacle.
I would take that. Yeah. No, I'd take any win actually. But no, it's just marvellous what the club do, and we can't thank them enough, and just to support that because the club meant a lot to him, and for them to do this is great.
Great stuff, mate. Well done. Thanks for coming in and sharing those stories with us.
That's great. Anytime.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks, brother.
That's all right. He loved the media. Whenever there was a media race on, he'd always be putting his hand up for it. I remember one year it was 1985. They used to have the big free day where they just let people in and they'd have all the novelty races. I think they had Lester Ellis and Barry Michael drive Clydesdales.
Yeah.
They had people in superhero capes. But they had a media race one day and we would have been just kids and Dad was in this race and he got beaten, but as his horse was coming back to scale at Moonee Valley and they'd come around past the mile turn and along the side there, the horse decided to throw a wobbly and throw itself down on the ground, and Dad's there and he's trying to steer it up. But he copped a bit of flack for that, but he always loved it. He owned it when it happened, but he loved those media races, and he did drive one for Vinny one night and he didn't follow instructions, and I think he might have copped a spray.
Yeah.
But I do believe the horse might have come out one next start.
Okay.
And Dad tried to take some credit for that. But
They were completely mad, weren't they? Because they could go as quick as they would go in a race. And there were some times they used to tell me that there were people in the media that had never really driven before, or sports people, and they would come and jump behind a horse with the hobbles on and follow a mobile and
they were standing starts.
or standing starts
Yeah.
and beyond.
Yeah, no, and there was one, or that particular year where Dad's horse threw itself down. I think it was Peter Taylor, son of Ron Taylor from the Trees. He might have knocked down half the field going into the first turn, and I think he got life. But to think about it, like to get your driver's license, you got to go through hoops and circles and all that, and then they're just letting these people in who sit behind typewriters and whatnot, and but they all loved them.
They would have been living the dream.
Oh yeah, and they were big names like Peter Donican and Bruce McAvaney and all these people. So it's not just Joe Blow writing for the free press or whatnot. They were the big journos of the time and everything. So they were big events amongst themselves. And if you won one of those, you got bragging rights. So he won a couple of those, so he was pretty happy with himself.
Good on you, mate.
No worries there.